Salvete discipulae. Here is the video version of the lecture that I gave on relative clauses. And that's keyed to Jenny's chapter 27, which titles itself Relative Pronouns. Relative pronouns introduce relative clauses, but the first thing that we need to talk about is what a clause is. So a clause differs from a phrase. A phrase is a group of words which do not contain a verb and therefore do not contain a subject. A sentence is a group of words which at a minimum contains a verb and a subject, or a predicate as they sometimes say. So for example, a phrase might be into the wind. That's a prepositional phrase. Or the big dog. That's a noun and an adjective. So remember, a sentence, as I say, has a verb and a subject. So, for example, you could say, the dog runs, or the girl is happy, right? Or the man throws the sword. All of those contain a verb and a subject. And in Latin, as you know, verbs can contain pronoun subjects in their endings. So you can have a one-word Latin sentence. Amo, I, that's the subject. Love, that's the verb, both contained in one word. Those are simple sentences, right? But sentences can sometimes link together two mini sentences in one big sentence. And when you do that, when you link together two mini sentences in one big sentence, those sentences are called clauses. Let me give you an example. I went to the fair. That's a sentence. I was happy. That's another sentence. When you link them together, you say, I went to the fair and I was happy. And now you have two sentences that aren't sentences anymore because they're parts of one sentence. They're two clauses. A relative clause is a particular kind of clause that begins with a relative pronoun. The relative pronouns in English are who or whom, if we're talking about people, and which or that, if we're talking about things. I don't mean interrogatives. So if you say, who is that? That's an interrogative pronoun. If you say, which color is your favorite? That's an interrogative. Actually, there it's which is functioning as an adjective, but those are interrogatives. Relative pronouns relate one clause to another, and they refer to referents. So if you say, for example, this is the girl who studies hard. Okay? This is the girl is the main clause, and who studies hard is the relative clause. Who is the relative pronoun. It's a relative pronoun because it's talking about the girl. Who is it that's studying hard? The girl. This is the girl who studies hard. This is the sword which I like the best. This is the speech which I am going to give. This is the queen whom I serve. These are the fish that I saw yesterday. Those are all relative clauses linked to main clauses. So each one of those sentences has a main clause and a relative clause. And the thing that links the relative clause to the main clause is the relative pronoun. Okay, so the main thing that you have to do, right now we're just going to deal with the difference between subjects and direct objects in the relative clause itself, because that's kind of tricky. All right, let's take two sentences as an example. I love the queen who rules me, and I love the queen whom I rule. In the first sentence, I love the queen who rules me. The queen is doing the ruling, right? So if you were to take that relative clause, who rules me, the who stands for what? It's pointing to the queen. It's relating to the queen. So if you were to take who rules me and turn it into a sentence, it would be the queen rules me. The who stands for the queen. So I love the queen who rules me, who rules me becomes the queen rules me. So, in that relative clause, the who is the subject. Now, I love the queen whom I rule. Whom I rule, or if you want to be sort of modern about it, I love the queen who I rule. Okay? Whom I rule, or who I rule, break that off and turn it into a whole sentence with a noun rather than a pronoun. I rule the queen, right? So there, the who or the whom is the direct object of the relative clause. So what are the implications for that in Latin? Well, you can guess. All right? Subjects in Latin go into the nominative case. Direct objects in Latin go into the accusative case. So whenever you have a relative pronoun that is a subject, it's going to go into the nominative case. And when you have a relative pronoun that's a direct object, it's going to go into the accusative case. But what about gender and number? Relative pronouns that are going to have to take on, just like adjectives take on, they're going to have to take on the gender and the number of the things, of the nouns that they refer to, their referents. Okay, so let's take that first sentence again. I love the queen who rules me. We said who rules me, the queen rules me, and therefore who is the subject of that clause, and it's going to go into the nominative case. But it's also going to be feminine, and it's going to be singular, because the queen is feminine and singular. So, I love the queen whom I rule the queen. So whom, or if you want to say who, that's okay, is going to go into the accusative case because it's the direct object of the relative clause. Okay, so that's going to go into the accusative case, but it's also still going to be feminine and singular because the queen is feminine and singular. Okay, so how do we do that in Latin? Well, if you look at the written form of this lecture, you'll see a little mini paradigm that just involves the nominative and accusative cases. What we have to do right now is look at the paradigm for the Latin relative pronoun. Okay, so that Latin relative pronoun paradigm is on page 151. And if you look at it, you'll see that the nominative singular forms for masculine, feminine, and neuter are qui, que, and quod. So if you then go over to the plural side, you'll see that the nominative singulars are qui, que, and que. So they're very similar. The plurals, the plural masculine and the singular masculine, the plural feminine, and the singular feminine are the same, but the plural and singular neuters are different. So in the nominative, it's qui, que, quod. In the nominative singular, it's qui, que, quod, and in the nominative plural, it's qui, que, que. The accusatives are, in the singular, masculine, feminine, neuter, quem, quam, quod. Notice that because of the neuter rule, the quads are the same, right? Neuter rule says that the nominative and accusative forms have to be the same. In the plural accusative, the masculine, feminine, and neuter forms are quos, quas, que. Quos, quas, que. So you have 6 times 2 different forms that you have to look at. Okay, so let's go back and look at our original sentence. So, I love the queen who rules me. We said that who rules me, that means the queen rules me. So who stands for the queen? The queen rules me. Who is the subject of that clause? So it's going to go in the nominative case, and it's going to be feminine in gender and singular in number. So if you look at your paradigm to find out which version of the relative pronoun is feminine, singular, and nominative, qui, que, quod, it's que. So if you want to say, I love the queen who rules me, and you say, amo reginam, quae me regit. I love the queen who rules me. So the relative pronoun that you're going to use is quae, and that's, I'm not concerned with you constructing the whole sentence right now. I just want you to find the Latin version of the pronoun that you're going to use. So you have to know what gender and number the referent is, the noun that it's referring to. Okay. I love the queen whom I rule. That's the second sentence. That means I rule the queen whom I rule the queen. So we said that who or whom is going to be in the accusative case. Since it refers to the queen, it's still going to be feminine and singular. So instead of, as in the first sentence, having nominative feminine and singular, you're going to want accusative feminine and singular. And if you look at your paradigm for the accusative singulars, masculine, feminine, and neuter, you're going to see quem, quam, quod, and the one that you want is going to be quam, because that's feminine, and it's singular, and it's accusative. So I love the queen whom I rule, amo reginam, quam rego, whom I rule. So quae in the first sentence, where the relative pronoun has to be nominative, and quam in the second sentence, where it has to be accusative. Let's try a couple of other practice sentences, okay? And these are also in the written version, which I'm going to put in the materials section and send to you in a Jupyter mail as well. So, the queen rules the land which I love. The queen rules the land is your main clause. Which I love is your relative clause. Which is your relative pronoun. It doesn't matter whether it's who or whom, which or that in Latin. It's always going to be qui, quae, quod. But you do have to figure out what the which is talking about. So, the queen rules the land which I love. What's the which talking about? The land, right? I love the land. If you take which I love and you break it off and you turn it into an independent sentence, it would be, which, instead of being which I love, it would be I, that's the subject, love the land. So the which is the direct object, the which, the relative pronoun, is the direct object of that clause. I love the land. So we're going to need accusative, right? And what about land? Land is feminine and it's singular. So we want the feminine, accusative, singular form. And as we saw before, that's quam. Whether you're referring to a queen or whether you're referring to land doesn't make any difference. The feminine, accusative, singular form is quam. So I love, the queen rules the land which I love. That would be Regina, regit, terram, the queen rules the land, which, quam, I love, amo. Okay, let's take another sentence. The friends see the wars which I fought. Okay, what does the which refer to? The friends see the wars which I fought. The which is talking about the wars, right? Because you fought the wars. And there you go. Which I fought, break that off, that's your relative clause. I fought the wars, so it's referring to the wars. The relative pronoun in that clause is going to be in the accusative case, and it's going to be neuter because war is neuter, and it's going to be plural because this is wars, not war. So you're going to look in your chart and you're going to look for the accusative, neuter, plural version. Okay, if you look in the plural nominatives, you're going to see masculine, feminine, neuter. You're going to see be qui, quae, quae. We don't want those because we don't want nominative. We want accusative. If you look at the accusatives, you're going to see quos, quas, quae. Quae and quae, and the nominative and the accusative are the same because of the neuter rule. So, the friends see the wars which I fought. Amici, that's the friends, right? They see, vident, bella, that's the neuter plural for bellum, belly, war. So amici, vident, Bella, and then we said we wanted the accusative, neuter plural. Quae, I fought, punyavat. Okay, so in that instance, it's quae. And that's your introduction to relative pronouns. We'll work on this for a while because I know it's confusing. But once you get the nominatives and the accusatives down and you see how to distinguish the relative pronoun when it is the subject and the relative pronoun when it is the direct object, then you can go on and do dative and genitive and ablative without too much trouble. Okay, great. I will soon be posting a practice lesson for you and then a quiz or test on this. All right. Love you all. Bye.